All right, welcome into Pod to Win the Game. I am Charles Robinson here today with Charles McDonald. We're heading towards the NFL draft, and we're going to start to see guys get traded here. Maybe some players get offloaded as teams prep to draft their replacements. And man, the Detroit Lions, Jeff Okudah, cornerback, Ohio State, who I remember, and this is quintessential why you can't believe everything you hear going into a draft about how perfect he was as a prospect. How like this is his evaluation was top. Like he was one of those tier one guys. When you break it into tiers, he was right at the top in that tier. And now they deal him to the Atlanta Falcons. 2020, number 3 overall draft pick gets dealt for a 5th round pick. You're probably, I got to imagine as a Falcons fan, you got to be at least somewhat excited about this because maybe there's something to work with there. I mean, not the Lions aren't as incompetent as they used to be, but you would think there's still got to be something there, right?
I was kind of surprised they traded him for a 5th because last year there was I think especially earlier in the season, there was a good stretch where he was starting to like develop into the player that they thought they were getting.
Right.
Maybe not like top 5, but certainly, a startable corner that had some high moments. And then towards the end of the year, his play dipped off. But, you're looking at a guy who's still like in his early 20s that has a lot left in the tank, you would imagine, at a position that's pretty valuable and at a position that like the Lions still need help at long term. I was a little surprised they were willing to give him up for a 5th round pick, but as a Falcons fan, I'm pretty excited. Like they haven't had like a second cornerback prospect since Robert Alford, and he only had like 2 good seasons in Atlanta before the wheels fell off with him. But I think where this is kind of a good spot for Okudah is he doesn't have to be the number 1 guy. They got AJ Terrell there. They signed Jesse Bates to play safety and solidify that spot. So, it's not as big of a load that he's going to be carrying as it was in Detroit. So right. I like it. Like I said, I was surprised that they gave him up for a 5th rounder because I think that the chance he ends up becoming like a quality player for a while, it's not like far-fetched. So I was a little surprised at that.
Here's what absolutely drives me insane about this for Detroit. And I don't mean to rip open old wounds, with the Lions. Okay, so we'll go back to the 2014 draft. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the drafts. I'll just go to the most recent worst. The 2014 draft, which Lions know this well. I'm sure they already know where I'm going with this. They end up taking Eric Ebron, 10th overall, right? Tight end. The guys that were drafted after him, Taylor Lewan, Odell Beckham Jr., Aaron Donald, Kyle Fuller, Ryan Shazier, who's going to be a really good player until he got hurt, Zach Martin, CJ Mosley. That's like the next 7 picks after they took Eric Ebron. Okay. Now let's go back to 2020. Andrew Thomas, pretty good tackle, right? We agree on that?
Yeah.
Pretty damn good tackle.
He's great.
Tua, Justin Herbert, even Derek Brown, the defensive tackle who was taken 7th in Carolina. I mean, you could probably even make a case for Isaiah Simmons, 8.
Not even the best corner in his own class.
I mean, what the living hell, man? It's rare that you see a team so thoroughly nuke a pick in, 2 drafts that were loaded. 2014 was pretty loaded. There were players that went right in front of Eric Ebron that were really good, and then the slew of players behind. I think 2020, we're going to end up, I really truly believe this. I think we're going to end up looking back at the 2020 draft, and we're going to be like, that is one of the best drafts we've seen in a decade, a couple of decades. I mean, have you looked at the 2020 class? It's insane, especially when you look at the first round. Good. It's nuts. It's hammered full of good players. And I get Detroit, like you could see, I guess you could have telegraphed maybe this was coming when you go, okay, Cam Sutton, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Emmanuel Mosley, there's going to be probably a corner there at 6. I would guess now that they're gonna draft. I would think that's awful. That is just awful to burn that kind of a pick where you had so many potentially franchise-changing players. And I understand people say, well, throw the quarterbacks out because Matt Stafford was on the roster, throw the tackle out because they had already, spent assets on tackles, all that stuff. I don't know how you blew this one this bad.
Dude, he just turned 24. I don't know. Like I would have been trying to hold on to his asset a little bit longer. I don't know if this is like a bad fifth round pick.
Fifth for a corner that a lot of people liked in 2020. Now, and you said he's 24. And clearly that must have been the best they could get, right? Because you have to shop him, right? You have to shop him. The weird thing though
is you have to shop him though?
Well, okay, so here's the weird thing about it is I don't remember anybody. I did not know he was available. Literally until the trade happened, I didn't know he was available. And so I'm like, okay, you never leaked it that, hey, we're open to trade offers on this guy, which is really the true way to shop it. Then every team in the league hears about it because they see the report. It'll pop up on whatever wire service, whatever, who one of the interns brings it and says, hey, it's on Pro Football Talk or Yahoo reported it or whoever that this guy is being pocket listed for a trade. Then everybody knows about it. Never heard that. Never saw that. So did you call 31 teams? Because unless you called 31 teams, I swear to God, I don't know how you couldn't get more than a fifth round pick out of this guy. Any corner, tackle, quarterback, cornerback, defensive end, right, edge guy, who people really liked in the last couple of drafts, typically you can get a better asset than just a fifth round pick out of it. Like, God, man.
And also, like we said before, talking about a guy, it's not like he was totally terrible last year. I thought he really had moments where it looked like he was figuring it out. And then I thought when you looked at the Lions cornerback situation this year, like they signed a couple guys, and I thought that with Okudah, maybe you actually have like a real secondary. But yeah, now they've kind of put themselves in a spot where they need some of these 1-year contract guys to hit in order for them to have some stability at the position. And obviously this really puts cornerback in the discussion at 6 because now it's really a glaring need for them again.
Yeah.
Like it has been the past couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, and it still doesn't make any sense to me because it's a position where you could easily stack assets. Okay. Is one of the corners in the draft, you're just like, oh my God, like this guy's we're absolutely over the moon over who this player is going to be. We're definitely taking him at 6. There's no way I don't see any way a corner goes in the top 5, right? So you figure they're sticking at 6. They're going to take a corner at 6. And maybe they see a Jalen Ramsey, in one of these corners that they're looking at right now. Maybe they see a Stephon Gilmore, like that kind of a player. And if that's the case, great. But I still think like go ahead and stack those assets and then flip Okudah later. It just I'm flabbergasted by this one. I've called around, I've asked like what the deal was, didn't get really any kind of like, no, everybody was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know. Like clearly somebody there didn't like him. Like there was something about that trade that leads you to believe that he was out of favor either with the coaching staff or the front office. And because it just feels like it was something that doesn't make a lot of sense at this stage. But you think he's going to start in Atlanta?
Rise up.
He's going to get a shot, right?
Hell yeah. They don't have anyone else. They've had, like outside Terrell, they've had probably the worst quarterback situation in the NFL. So yeah, I would imagine he starts. And like if he doesn't start, then he's just totally cooked because he doesn't have any real competition as things stand right now.
I kind of like Atlanta's offseason. I'm not going to lie. I feel like I really like the offseason. If they get Ritter right, let go of Lamar. Like stop. I know you refuse. It's like
no, I'm over the Lamar thing.
Okay.
It's just this is just it's how they rope you back in. Like they're never just as destitute as like where the Browns were for the past 20 years. It's like bad, but you're intrigued, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I feel like. If Ritter ends up being a top 14 quarterback, okay, I think this team's moving and like swiftly in the right direction. I'm still it blows my mind the number of wins they've had the last 2 seasons. Because each season I'm thinking this is a 3-win team, and then they well overachieve. Now, granted, they're in a division. I get all that, but as long as Ritter works out, it'll be.
They have a vision. They have a plan, and like there have been times like where they really overachieved their talent level under Arthur Smith. Like just about every single time they've played the Bucs, and that's the Bucs when they were still the Bucs. They've given them a game. I remember they went to Buffalo and gave the Bills a game the first year Arthur Smith was there. So like they're tough and scrappy, and I'm with you. Like I'm pretty surprised they've won 14 games over the past 2 years. And this is the first year like they've had kind of a real roster to work with. So the expectations are back, and that is what it is. I had my fun little year run of house money, and now we're here.
I'm going to be fascinated to see how he plays in Atlanta, and to continue to try and pick at why he washed out in Detroit. I'll tell you this: if they pick another corner at 6 and that player does not work out, this is like, man, good luck. And I hate to kill the Lions because I feel like they're doing the right things and they're building the right way, and but God, this is just. Even if they had taken a corner at 6, my thought process would have been like, oh, great. Well, now you got a couple young corners. You clearly like this guy in 2020. There's something to work with there. Maybe that's what he needs is another young guy, kind of push him, whatever. But we didn't get a chance to touch on this, not in depth. The arbitration claim filed against the Arizona Cardinals owner, Michael Bidwell. I wish this wasn't going to arbitration. I'll be honest with you. I wish, because the problem is it goes to arbitration. You hear about the claims, the initial claims, but a lot of whatever comes out in this arbitration, because it's arbitration, the NFL loves these things going to arbitration. It never becomes public. But what we know now, though, this is amazing. First thing we heard was, and this is all so Terry McDonough is the one that's brought this claim against the Arizona Cardinals. Former executive fired. Basically, he's laying out all these allegations of things that happened while he was there that he was not on board with, and basically issues that he has with Bidwell. First, the alleged burner phone. So Steve Keim gets extreme DUI, right? Gets suspended under personal conduct policy. It's being alleged that Bidwell was like, no, we're going to go ahead and keep communicating with that guy. So Steve Wilkes, head coach, is going to have a burner phone. Terry McDonough is going to have a burner phone. Everybody's going to keep talking to this guy. McDonough claims he wasn't on board with it. Kept receipts, says he still has the phone, which is probably when you're going to engage in that kind of thing, collect all the evidence at the end. Like when right? Like the scheme, just make sure you got all the tech that you put out there, because that's a pretty big loose thread to have. There's a claim Bidwell shut down a workplace survey when their responses were negative. He's been accused of mistreating pregnant and Black employees. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that Jerry Richardson comes to mind. Okay, when Jerry Richardson was ultimately, after the investigation was forced to sell the Panthers, he sold them, and then the Mary Jo White investigation came out afterward. Dan Snyder stuff. I mean, Snyder's deeper, longer running, but again, it's this misconduct aspect, right? Some of the Cowboys stuff with Jerry Jones, it just leads you to believe that if we really were to get under the hood of every single NFL franchise, there's probably a lot of stuff under there that people would not necessarily be comfortable with. But I want to focus this through. First, we'll talk about the burner phone. Steve Wilkes coached there 1 season, got fired, kind of got on in the process, and after he got fired, some people were like, well, it was totally unfair, strapped with a team that was sort of in rebuild mode. Josh Rosen was his quarterback. Obviously, that's not great. We see now in retrospect that really wasn't great because Josh washed out basically of the league quickly. And he only gets, a 1-year shot at it. Steve goes on, most recently in Carolina, had a chance to be the interim coach. They rebounded under him. Now he's the defensive coordinator for the 49ers. Steve looks really good to me. Coming not just what Steve has done coaching wise since he left that organization, but now looking back, If it settles out that this is real and Steve was there for this, man, I mean, criminal that guy gets fired after one season with all this other going on.
Yeah, I was reading through some of that. I was like, oh, wow, this is just a classic American billionaire story.
Unbelievable.
Like, wow. Unbelievable. And I think there's a lot here, but going back to the burner phone thing, what has Steve Keim accomplished where he should get like preferential treatment in a situation where he has had an extreme DUI and is still able to contact employees? What did you do besides just be friends with Michael Bidwell? I don't really understand. And I think when you hear stuff like this and you read about like the player survey where they don't like they make the players pay for the food at the facility, they don't have a whole lot of things where they're looking after players' children and their families while they're working and you know, helping out the team. Stuff that like a lot of workplaces have, not even just NFL teams. It kind of brings into focus and paints a clear picture as to why this team has been lifeless over the past couple years. Because even remember when Cliff Kingsbury started there, they were decent under Kingsbury when it started, but then it all started to fall apart a little bit and it got stale there. And, you know, it quickly kind of died out last year. It ended up in him being fired. So I tend to think when you look at these organizations where the culture is bad and things aren't getting done, it usually starts from the top down. And if I was going to figure out a reason as to why the Cardinals have been underachievers, I guess really since they kind of made the Super Bowl with Kurt Warner, I think you can kind of look at the ownership as a big reason as to why.
When the NFLPA did their survey, right, the anonymous survey with the players, we sat there and they're like, Jory and I were in that meeting where the NFLPA, you know, invited in some reporters and started to talk about the results of the survey. I remember sitting there thinking, I'll bet you I can name in aggregate scoring. I'll bet you I can name the bottom 5 teams. And it absolutely, it's stacked up that way. And Arizona was one of those teams where you're like, yeah, that's going to be a really bad one because all you hear over the years, players who exit out of that organization, you know, it's not run the way ultimately it should be run. And I'm with you. We kind of thought Kingsbury comes in there, they make the move to get Kyler, and you're like, okay, it's pretty aggressive. Like, are they starting to turn things in the right, you know, direction? And then you find out all this stuff is going on behind the scenes right before they start to make those moves. But I hope that for the league's sake, you look at Stephen Ross, got a first-round pick stripped, right, for the tampering investigation. This stuff, I would start, if I was the NFL, you really want to punish, you know, owners, you really want to hold owners accountable, start taking away things that they care about. Take two first-round picks away. Take 3 first-round picks away. See if this stuff continues to happen. Now, they won't do that because we're finding out, I mean, Roger Goodell, it seems like he was a buddy to Dan Snyder. That he was there helping Dan Snyder along during this whole way. It feels like they've dragged their feet on this investigation so that it won't come out until after the team is ultimately sold in Washington. So I think, you know, from the standpoint of it being a buddy system, that's not really ever going to happen. And I feel like Ross, the reason why Ross got hit was because he was with other owners. Because he's tampering with players and other owners are like, bullshit, you're not going to tamper with my player. You can't be like that. They'll stand up for that. But God, they don't want to see draft picks stripped because, you know, you're treating, you know, workplace employees like crap. You're using burner phones. Like the thing about the burner phone too, I want to make this clear. I'm not naive. I know every single organization, they do all kinds of stuff with burner phones all the time. Okay. I've gotten told directly from players, from agents, conversations about, you know, ex-head coach calls this other guy, you know, they use their wives' phones to communicate. They're not supposed to be talking to each other. And that's how some player starts getting wooed by some coach and they have some background. And if everybody knew what was going on, it would be a tampering investigation and draft picks would get stripped. It does happen. I just think when I look at all this, number one, I do think Bidwell should be held accountable. I do think they should have draft picks stripped if this stuff's true. And number two, I think people better completely rewrite the narrative on Steve Wilks. Okay. And by the way, Steve was asked about this. And you know what Steve has said about this? I'm Saul, and that's between y'all. Like, I'm not getting involved in that. I'm going to go ahead. And I'm like, so what's not, if you're an NFL team, what's not to like about that guy? Right? He's like, you know what? I'm doing my job. Like, that's what I'm here for, to do my job. I'm going to go ahead and coach this 49ers defense. I have said before, I think
work in San Francisco.
Yeah, I work in San Francisco now. Yeah, I'm just in the same division. Okay, I'm glad I'm getting another sideline when we face Arizona twice a year. I think he's going to be back on head coaching list. I think he should be back on head coaching list. And I think you should completely move that Arizona Cardinals season off the books. Steve Wilks should not be held responsible for anything that happened that year. I feel bad for Steve Wilks. And I absolutely think that if he wants apologies from people.
Just to take it one step further, like think about the allegations that we're dealing with. Like, these are very serious racism and potential sexual harassment stuff. And I would just ask people to think about themselves as far as your Steve Wilks thing. Is someone who would have these allegations against them, are they really above pinning a bad season on a black coach that isn't very popular in the first place? So it's a tough workplace once you get stuck in those spots, because you also have to understand that, like, these are jobs that people would love to have because it's one of 32 of, like, each of them for the most part. So, people are willing to endure a lot of crap to be a part of these NFL teams, but it doesn't make it right at the end of the day. So hopefully the NFL gets this one right. If, they're able to prove all these things that's being said about Bidwell, because there really is just no place for this in football or really any workplace when you start thinking about like what was actually accused of Bidwell. So it's bad all over the place.
It's unfortunate that, like I said, it's going into arbitration because we're not going to find out everything. I highly doubt Bidwell's going to be forced to sell when you consider what had to happen with Richardson to get him to that point, with what had to happen with Snyder. I'll be honest with you, post Snyder, I don't think Richardson would be forced to sell again or be put in that position where, and when I say forced to sell, I think it was just suggested to Jerry, okay, this investigation is going to come out. It's not going to look good. It's probably best for you to go ahead and you're going to sell your team for the richest amount ever in NFL history up until that point. It's a good exit point for you. And let's go ahead and move on. But after the Dan Snyder thing, I don't know if Richardson would happen now, which is exactly why I'm like, this Bidwell, and this is saying something. It feels like peanuts compared to Dan, Remember Denny Green? They are who we thought they were. He was talking about his own franchise at that point. Okay, may Denny Green rest in peace. He was talking about the Cardinals. Okay. Oh man.
You don't acquire that much money in America by being a great person. So.
I reiterate this. Every single one of those NFL owners, there's bodies. There is. I don't think you become a billionaire in America without having some stuff out there, right? It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Before we get to the break, I want to talk about Saquon Barkley. He's not going to sign the franchise tender before the start of the season. So he's on the franchise tag. That means he's not signing the franchise tender. It means he is not going to be part of anything they do this offseason until he signs that franchise tender in July and shows up to ultimately play football. If you want to work out a long-term contract, which he does, this is the move, right? That's the move. You're just like, hey, I'm not showing. So that's how I'm going to put pressure on negotiations. And let's see if we can get a deal hammered out by July. He will sign that. If they don't get the contract done, he will sign that franchise tender in July because he's not going to give up a year of money. The Le'Veon Bell thing's not going to happen again. So
yeah,
but interesting, definitely interesting that he's taken the aggressive stance here.
Yeah, and I kind of think that just all running backs should in general, if they have just a smidge of leverage that they can try and execute. I'm not sure how much it's like helps Saquon Barkley right now, but the running back position is just in a place where I think these guys should just fight for everything they can. Le'Veon Bell probably went a little bit too far by sitting out that season. I'm not sure how much that even helped him financially at the end of the day. Uh, Definitely think it probably hurt his football career more than it helped it. But outside of that, I think it's a good idea. Because Saquon Barkley's a guy who's already dealt with injuries. There's no telling like how long this career of his can last. And that's not even just to like be an asshole and put bad vibes all over it. He's a running back that carries a huge, huge load of his team's offense. And I think that those facts alone should uh he should be used in his case for him to get paid. They, I don't think this is like a normal running back relationship that, they have with their teams. Because there's a few guys where you kind of just got to have them around. I think, like, what we've seen from Derrick Henry over the years, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley when he's healthy, those guys can kind of buck the trend of, you don't really pay them. So it wouldn't even behoove the Giants to not have something close to done by the time we're approaching training camp, because I think last year they showed as big of an improvement as Daniel Jones made in order for him to get that contract. Saquon Barkley was still a huge, huge piece of how they were actually able to move the ball. So he's got a little bit of leverage, and I think this is smart for him to execute it, because you never know how long your earning window lasts as an NFL running back.
So I had a GM I was talking to. We were actually talking about the running backs in this draft, and like he just said straight up, he's like, the new playbook. He's like, and he said there will be maybe two, maybe under like really, really exceptional circumstances, 3 guys that are running backs that will end up getting contract extensions that are in that top tier. He said everybody else, and he brought up Saquon. He said, I'm telling you right now, we're trending toward, especially if you take a running back in the first round, we were talking a little bit about Bijan. He's like, play him the 5 years, control the 5th year option. If they're really great players, you put them on 2 tags, and then you just wave goodbye. That's it. You draft running backs to be 7-year players if you draft them in the first round, and you're not paying them after that. And he's like, no matter how mad they get, no matter how much they put their foot in the ground and refuse to show up, then you just say, okay, then don't show up. And you go and you get other running backs until they have to show up and play. And he brought up, it was interesting because I had asked him too, we were talking about Kareem Hunt, and I was like, it's like Kareem Hunt can't get a deal right now. And he was like, yeah, because, if you look at him, if you watch the film, you can see he doesn't quite have what he used to have. He's not that player he was in Kansas City anymore. Like some people are suggesting, well, why isn't Kansas City just go get him again? He was so successful in that setup, because he's not the same athlete he was then. And yeah, he just said, look, he thinks the unwritten playbook now is just play these guys, control them as long as you can, put as many touches on them as you can, and then be ready to move on when they're 27, 28 years old, and start gearing up for the next running back that you're going to slot in there. And he's like, I'm telling you, he's like, watch, Bijan will be that guy. They'll control him for whoever drafts him in the first round, control him for 7 years. And he said, he's like, Bijan, this is kind of interesting. He thinks Bijan's at a little bit of a disadvantage because he's going to be a first round pick. He was like, if I was Bijan, I'd want to be Brees. I want to be Kenneth Walker. I don't want that 5th year of control. Like you might have a fighting chance if the team can only control you for 4 years. You actually might have a fighting chance. Like if they got to get to the tag that much faster, maybe you have a fighting chance to actually get a decent extension. And because you're still going to be young, you're still going to be seen as being in their plans for several years. But he's like, Bijan, through that 5th year, it's like, that's so damaging for running backs nowadays, because that takes you to 26, maybe it takes you to 27, and teams are already thinking of moving on at that point.
It's kind of similar to why like Jalen Hurts is kind of an advantage now, because he didn't have the 5th year option, and now he gets to cash in on that at the perfect time for him. So
yeah,
Dak too,
same
right,
thing.
right. Yeah. I'm imagining the same thing happened with Russell Wilson. So, it's not the worst situation to be in. I don't know like what the money looks like from say pick 25 to pick 35, but for a running back, it might just be more practically valuable to have that fourth year or that fifth year option removed, and then you get to see if you can get someone to pay you because, like you said, it's tough out here, man. And even in the situation where it's a 4-year deal, like you could still get a franchise tag at the end of that, and as we see with the Saquon Barkley situation, that franchise tag for running backs is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller by the year. So that's not even kind of the money that you're looking for. Moral of the story here, said it again, or said it before in this podcast, don't let your kids play running back.
Do not let your kids play running back. Seriously. And it really is, when you think about it, it really is the outlier. Because almost any other position, okay, if you're a team and you move up into the bottom of the first round to get a quarterback, you do that because you're like, okay, we get the extra year of control. It's quarterback. That's important. The salaries can fly pretty fast with these guys. But it's different usage. You're doing it with a quarterback because you're like, we can get all these years of control and then hopefully, he'll be awesome. And then we'll do the big, huge extension or whatever. Running backs, you're doing it because you're like, we just want to wear them out as much as we possibly can before the deal, and then we're not going to do the deal at all. It's like completely opposite circumstances. You do a quarterback because you want to keep them around forever, and you want to add on that big, massive contract and have as many extra years in between as you can. But with running backs, it's so jacked up. It really is. Running back is just, good Lord.
It's bad. It's in a
really
bad spot right now, man.
Oof.
Yeah,
it is. And you and I are going through, we're doing the all juice team, and, we're looking through all these other running backs, and you just listen to teams talk about running backs, and it's just, as good as Bijan is, guys are just like, well, like you can't,
right.
In any other position, given his skill level and how, he looks on film and how we would rate him, any other position, top 5 pick, if this was a quarterback, he's first easily. It's just crazy. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, and this is what happens when you play a position that's kind of the success of players around you almost matters more than your own skill. Because like if I have let's talk about the Eagles for a second. What running back would be bad in that situation? Like actually, like actively bad. Because every running back that they put back there last year, from Miles Sanders to Ken Gainwell to Boston Scott, they all produced. So it's a tough situation for them. And again, don't let your kids play running back.
All right. Well, let's throw it to the ad break. We'll come back on the other side, and we're going to get to some of the risers and fallers in this NFL draft. I have a bone to pick actually with this idea that these even exist right now. But we'll get to that. So we'll see you on the other side. All right, we're back. You and I are going to talk about 2 of our risers, 2 of our fallers that we, from what's out there in the ether with these picks as the draft gets closer. I have a bone to pick, though, with this idea that there are risers and fallers in this NFL draft. And it's because you and I have made all these calls. We're doing all this work for the All Juice team. And I think it's just I don't know who's rising. I don't know who's falling, because everybody seems to have wildly differing opinions on almost every player in this draft. It's insane how uneven the assessments are. And I would say some of the people that I know are super plugged into front offices who have been doing this for a lot of years, like, Daniel Jeremiah. All GMs know who Daniel Jeremiah is, right? When you look at his big board, right? When you look at the big board of Todd McShay or Mel Kiper or whoever, there's a lot of variance between those boards. And I think the reason for that variance is, like, when we make these calls, is that I'll feel like, I'm getting some traction on a certain player that, it seems like a lot of, and then the next 3 calls, if I bring that player up, they all kill him. They don't like him for some reason. It's this or that. It's some measurement, or it's this piece of film. I don't think we know who realistically. We're going to talk about some guys because it's so overtly obvious. But outside of the extremely overtly obvious guys, I have no clue what's going to happen on draft day. And we're going to hear this phrase that somebody fell, big slide into the second round. And it probably isn't. It probably is not a slide. Unless one of these quarterbacks, let's say, okay, if Will Levis goes to the bottom of the first round, okay, then I would be willing to say that's a faller. But your biggest rise, let's talk about biggest risers first. So Anthony Richardson, right? Can we agree on that? Anthony Richardson from the beginning of this process. So the season ends, right? It's clear Anthony Richardson went from a guy who all the talent, but there was a lot of like worry about, the development, how much work he had to do to get to the ceiling, all this stuff. So, he's going to be latter third of the first round. When this process started, everyone was kind of saying he's probably a latter third guy. However, everyone agreed, just wait until he gets out there and people are going to be blown away by what he brings to the table as an athlete. That happened. He realistically is, I think there's little doubt he's inside the top 10 and probably inside the top 5, right? I think we can agree with that.
Yeah, which is crazy. It's funny because I think when you watch, or not watch, but consume like media, especially from college football fans, they're like, dude, there's no way that you can take this guy in the first round. But you have to remember it's a different game. It's a different thing than just straight looking at, was I afraid of this guy on Saturday versus what's possible for him on Sunday in the NFL. So I get it. I think that, he's probably going to end up a top 5 pick, probably a top 4 pick, just because I think with the way that the draft order is lined up this year, we might actually for real see 4 quarterbacks go with the top 4 picks. And it to me, when I watch this film, it makes sense. Like, I don't think he's nearly as bad as the completion percentage numbers might suggest. There's a lot of, things that are going wrong with Florida's offense. And, you kind of see the remnants of the Dan Mullen era where the recruiting efforts had really started to tail off. Especially, I think you see the wide receiver. They had a good offensive line situation, but it was a pretty high difficulty scheme. And I think the more you watch him, the more you kind of get an appreciation for what he was dealing with and what he was going through. And obviously the physical tools are just top notch. So, I do find it kind of funny when we like going into the combine, we already knew that Anthony Richardson was a great athlete. And then he comes out, has like the greatest quarterback combine of all time, and it boosts him. I think that double counting is kind of funny sometimes, but he's earned, his rise among the drafted, and I think he's a pretty promising prospect if he gets drafted as early as we're projecting right now.
People have talked about the relative athletic score, right? RAS, and he's got a 10, right? And so people are like mind blowing that this guy's got a 10. All right, I'm in Houston. Clayton Tune's got a 9.72. All right, and I liked Clayton Tune, watching Clayton Tune. But I also was like, I see what this offense is doing, and it's not, it's that his arm isn't going to be nearly as impressive, on the NFL level, and the defenses he's facing, some of the offensive things he can do, it's going to be completely different. And I think it's that package, obviously, and it's when you start to look down the line, you're like, how many quarterbacks come into a draft with this level of athleticism who look like him? Like, just have you just don't get a lot of really big, strong-armed, fast athletes at the quarterback position, and every coaching staff believes they're the ones that can get, we're going to get the most out of this guy. So it's not hard for a player like him to rise. That's also part of the interesting when you bring up the offense that people are what they're watching on film with him. Like, talk about Jalen Hyatt, right? The Tennessee wide receiver. When I would talk to guys about him, some like him, some hate, like, we're just like, that offense is insane. They're like, if you ever watched the offense, they're like, it doesn't look like anything.
It's not real.
Yeah, they're like, it's complete. They're like, the spacing is wonky as hell. They're like, show me when he's ever had, like, his literally man-to-man situations are a bare minimum over the course of his entire time at Tennessee. They're like, he rarely ever had to go up man-to-man with somebody. They're like, go look at how many times he was like coming off the line of scrimmage, stacked behind another wide receiver. He's just like, there's nothing tangible about it. And they're like, okay, we get the speed. Like there's certain things there that we understand, but like we have no clue what he looks like against normal competition. And so some guys like the traits that he brings to the table, and they're like, yeah, that might be the best, wide receiver out there. And there are others that are like, he should be 10th. Because I have no clue what I'm really actually looking at when it comes to how he's going to have to face and read and understand, route adjustments and sight adjustments, all these different things that are going to happen. So Richardson, I would agree with him in terms of being a riser. There's this other one, though. And I'm glad we're going to talk about him. So Stetson Bennett. We go
what the hell?
Okay, first off, all through the college football season, right? And I had asked guys who got like, does this guy have a shot? No. You think he can be NFL quarterback? No. This is like no. Then we get to the college football playoff, and then we get to the combine, and all of a sudden at the combine, it was interesting to hear people were like, hey, Stetson Bennett, and I'm talking about team personnel guys that are like, Stetson Bennett. I don't know. He might have had the best showing at the combine of a quarterback. He might have, thrown better than most other quarterbacks. I'm like, what the is going on? I'm like, what? Like, I just went through the entire season, and you're like, no. And now all of a sudden you're telling me he might be a 3rd round pick? You were just telling me he was going to be a 6th, a 7th. He's going to be a guy that is never going to play on the NFL level. Now you're telling me he's going to be a 3rd? Because a 3rd has a real chance of potentially developing into an NFL starter. I'm at a loss. Like, I'm completely flabbergasted that we're here with this guy right now after what I had heard. And I don't mean based on my assessment. I mean based on everything I heard over the course of the season. And then all of a sudden in March, end of February, beginning of March, through that combine, and I guess coming off the heels of the college football playoff, it just changed, I guess. Unreal.
I don't know. Seuss, I say this as I've seen that literally every single game Stetson has played in college because I'm a Georgia fan.
You're a Georgia fan, right? And you played college football.
It makes no sense. Like, I think of Stetson as like, he can be like a little change of pace backup quarterback.
He's Taysom Hill. He's like a smaller Taysom Hill.
Yeah, who's the guy that the Rams had behind Wolford? Like, that's who he reminds me of. The backup quarterback for the Rams who could kind of run around a little bit and clearly not like talented as a thrower, but it's different enough from Stafford that can kind of give you headaches in some key spots if you're trying to prepare for it. But I can't imagine, or I can't think of a quarterback or really any player that has had the offseason that Stetson Bennett had and would be considered a riser. So obviously wins the national championship, then is, and I think the important part to me with Stetson Bennett is all of this has to be viewed under the lens that he's 25. So hopefully you're thinking like maybe a little bit more mature than the 20 and 21-year-olds that are coming out in the draft. And he gets arrested for, drunken disorderly conduct. And then the most bizarre thing to me was like turning down the Senior Bowl invite, because to me, he's the type of quarterback that should be going to the Senior Bowl. Not Will Levis, because he doesn't have a whole lot to gain, but like if Stetson just went out there and said, I'm not playing with a supreme talent over advantage as I usually am with Georgia versus any other team. I'm going to go there, compete, show what I can do. Decided not to do that. And then
didn't do that.
At the combine, combine, he ended up running 4.67, which is fine. Good shorts all the time. But like, I don't think the athleticism was ever really out of the question if you watch him play. It's like, are you going to do the things that can help you be successful as a pro? And I don't think he's answered yes on that. How is his draft stock rising? How?
I am completely at a loss on this one. He's 5'11", okay? He's 194 pounds. Okay, I guess the 4.67, like it doesn't, teams should be put off by a player who gets that invite to the Senior Bowl and really, I think, needs to show, you can play with a mixed group of characters, right? They're not all 5 stars, right? You're not surrounded by, you're going to have varying levels of talent. Now they're Senior Bowl, obviously they're all good players. They get invited there for a reason.
Right.
But you have to be able to show that you can go in and command a different group of guys. Like I remember when Herbert went in there, and the whole book on Herbert was, and by the way, Justin Herbert went to the Senior Bowl. Okay. He got invited, and Herbert went. And I remember it was, he's quiet. Can he really be a leader? Like all this stuff. And I remember I talked to his group leader that year coming out of it. And I said, what's your assessment? And the group leaders, what they do is they keep an eye on their group and kind of see how the guys talk to each other, what the leadership traits are. They write up a whole report on this, right? And the group leader said to me, he's like, you know what, man? Every single guy responded to him. Every walk of life, every ethnicity, it didn't matter. Like they rallied around him the way you would want a group of guys, because that's what's going to happen in the NFL. You got to go in the NFL and you're going to deal with people different ages, different experiences. And he was like, he's going to be completely fine. And guess what happened? Once the NFL is completely fine. That's a valuable piece of information. And then Stetson Bennett just didn't show. So
because I tend to think if he had gone to the Senior Bowl and played well, maybe he could have gone top 100 and ended up like at the end of the 3rd round. Shoot, like less accomplished guys than him have, but you have to go about this the right way.
I'm telling you, C-Mac, I think this guy is a smaller, arguably less athletic version of Taysom Hill. I really do. I think he's 30.
Oh, he's definitely less athletic than Taysom Hill.
Yeah, he's 30 pounds lighter. He's, 3-4 inches shorter. And he's going to be somebody that I don't think there's going to be any real world, like applicable. You're going to go and you're going to watch him throw and you're going to be like, I don't know. I guess apparently everybody was lying to me from September to like late December. And then all of a sudden it just changed. It's ugh. And by the way,
it's weird because like he does have some nice plays though. Like some of the accuracy stuff is pretty cool.
Okay,
but again, he's small.
That's fine. That's fine. Like I get it. I'm not. Look, I don't want to completely destroy the guy in terms of was he successful? Yeah, but given everything around him, given everything he's bringing to the table as a quarterback, all these different things, this idea that suddenly he's risen into the 3rd round, and that's I've actually had some guys say to me that they think he potentially could be a 3rd round pick.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'm just stunned. I'm completely
based on his skill.
Yeah. Now that
it makes no sense.
And that's part of this whole risers and fallers idea is I don't know if it's even true. We could get into the draft. And I mean, look, Malik Willis last year, right? It was people were like, hey, a lot to like about him. There were guys telling me that they would maybe prefer him over their current starting quarterback. There were quite a few who were like, yeah, he's probably gonna be a 1st round pick. And then he wasn't. Not only was he not a 1st round pick, he wasn't a 2nd round pick either. And so we'll wait and see if this one's actually legitimate. So biggest fallers, I disagree with this, but supposedly it's going to be Jalen Carter, right? I think that's horse. I don't think he's going anywhere past 5. I don't think he's falling. I mean, I guess you could say 1 to 5, right? But I don't think he's going past 5. And how swift of a fall really is that, given that we knew quarterbacks were going to push up to the top of this draft anyway?
Like I don't really know how much of a fall it is if the reason, if one of the big reasons why you wouldn't go top 4 is like strictly the position you play. I don't think that any of the quarterbacks like better at being quarterbacks than he ends up being a defensive tackle, but it's just a more valuable spot. Obviously. So like when we start talking about him falling, I've been calling a lot of BS around just what's happening here. Like, dude, the Raiders apparently weren't going to draft him at all, took him off the board, and then Schefter reported yesterday or today that he's on a visit to the Raiders.
Yeah,
so like, right. See, and I remember like this is like kind of, it goes back like when we were in Indianapolis and I was, asking around like, hey, what do you really think about this Jalen Carter stuff? And basically everyone got back to me. He's like, it's concerning, but. And I think that's kind of where you're going to find himself, or that's where he's going to find himself on draft day, where, I've talked to multiple people that have compared him to like, just in terms of play style, like Ndamukong Suh in terms of what he can be in the NFL. And I get the quarterbacks will go ahead of that just about every time, but you're going to start getting down to like pick 8 and pick 9. It's like, holy crap! Like, are we really just going to pick a way worse player than Jalen Carter? I don't know. I think like I can't see him getting past like 10 where the Eagles are, because I think that they would sprint to the board.
But C-Mac, if that happened, if he got to 10, then I would agree. Okay, there's a legitimate fall that occurred, right? Then I would agree. There's actually a fall that occurred. I don't think he fell out of 1. Okay, he was never going 1. Okay, he wasn't. 1 was always going to be a quarterback pick. The Bears were not sticking to take Jalen Carter 1. What happened in Georgia, the off-field stuff, the accident, the allegations of street racing, all that stuff, wasn't keep that. They didn't all of a sudden go, oh, geez, we got to get out of this pick. Our guy is not. No, they weren't. They were going to trade that pick for assets no matter what. So that meant a quarterback was definitely going 1. Well, guess what? Quarterback's very likely going at 2. I mean, we'll see how much of this, stuff is true or not about what the Texans would or wouldn't do if Bryce Young came off the board at 1. But a quarterback's going 1. Quarterback very likely is going to 2. A team's very likely going to trade to 3 to take a quarterback. Okay, so that already takes the top 3 picks out. Now he's 4. That's almost where his basement naturally would have started. 4. Okay, I mean, 4. If he ends up going off the board at 5, he didn't fall like anybody else. As you and I did the all juice team, people they'll have to figure out whether or not Carter made our all juice team or not. It was interesting though when you heard guys start to nitpick him. And one of the things, so I had an evaluator who said, look, like his film's really good. Like there's no question, like he's a dominant player, but they're like, it does seem like he is not 100% all the time. And I was kind of like, I don't think most players get 100% every single play. Like I get like this whole idea of taking plays off, where he's like, well, he takes some plays off. I'm like, yeah, well, I remember like Ndamukong Suh took some plays off. Like dominant players take plays off. It happens. I almost wonder if it's because the workout, when he tapped out at his pro day, if that kind of got guys going back and looking at film and going, okay, why? Why is, he could have been dominant 70% of the film I'm watching. He was dominant 50%. And that 50% was so good that he altered a game. And then they go, okay, what was his snap count? Okay, I know a snap count. He was playing behind all these other guys the year before, and there's a rotation. But if this guy's supposedly the best player in this draft, he should have been able to get more run than just being in a rotation the year before. It's all this nitpicking that starts to happen.
That last one is crazy to me because they had 3 first-round picks on the defensive line last year.
I get it. But I mean, I'll tell you right now what the response would be, though. They had 3 first-round picks, none of whom had the talent that he did. That he is actually out of all, and he's going to be first-round pick himself. And out of that entire group, he is the superior player. He's the alpha. He's the Ndamukong Suh out of that group. And I will say this. I would agree with that. If he reaches his full potential, if he gets to that ceiling, he probably ends up being the best player ultimately out of that group. So in their minds, it's, yeah, he had a bunch of super talented players in front of him, but okay, if he's the alpha, he still should have been eating the majority of the snaps. I get it. I totally understand. That's just kind of how it goes.
Yes.
And that's how this draft is definitely going to be.
I also think that with like the taking plays off thing, to me, I feel like and this is just like anecdotal stuff. I feel like that's kind of become a more frequent complaint. And I think it's kind of like a misunderstanding of like what defensive linemen are being asked to do in college now. And like the whole thing's messed up. Like me and my friends, we call it anti-defense, where basically you have a bunch of guys just like holding the point where they're playing what's called like a mint or a tight defense, which is where you have a nose who's head up on the center. And then you have like what's called a 4-eye, which is you're in the B gap, but you're not lined up over the guard. You're lined up over the tackle. And basically your job is just to eat shit so everyone else around you can make a play.
Run around and make plays.
And, right. So, I think when, we especially like, and honestly, that's part of the reason why I thought Trevon Walker was a bad pick at number 1 last year, because you have to basically train him how to be an NFL defensive lineman, because he's not someone that was standing up a bunch on the edge and running with free like two-way goes and where they're letting him just just cut loose and run up the field. It's a much more like structured style of football that college football is playing. And I think it kind of leads to not the cleanest, like translatable reps when you're looking at defensive linemen. So yeah, because I've seen production stuff with him, with Jalen Carter. For me at least, I think there's an explanation for injury for like the first half of the season. Then you just have this defense, like style of defense where, especially at Georgia, we'll just choke you out and make you punt on 3rd and 8 or 4th and 8 every single time. And then we're not as concerned on getting like these explosive plays in the backfield because we know we have the players to just kind of hold up and let you eat 1-2 yard gains every single play before you have to punt. So it's not the same style of defense where you're looking at the NFL and a lot of teams, they let their 3 technicians run up the field and get penetration that way because things happen a little quicker in the NFL. So I think just the style of defense that's being played is leading to some of these production concerns, especially with Jalen Carter and some of these other guys.
Yeah, I know it's there is definitely an entire conversation to be had about how much. I had a GM who told me that offensive line players now, they're like, it's insane trying to do assessments now on offensive linemen and at the college level. They're like, it's so up compared to how we play our game on the NFL level and how offensive linemen play their game on the college level. They're like, literally, this guy's like, there's no bigger disconnect in terms of one position than offensive line on the NFL level and then offensive line on the college level, just because of how they set up, what they're expected to do, how the offenses are structured, even the body, some of the body types. I mean, it's just, and that affects in turn, it has to affect how you assess defensive linemen, right? Because of how offenses are structured, you get defensive linemen who play differently, and you're starting to try and project what is this really going to look like, on the NFL level. And so I highly doubt he's going to be. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'd be stunned if he gets out of the top 5-6. I would be absolutely floored. I could be completely wrong on that, and that'll be an interesting conversation after day one. But at this point, I would definitely be surprised. Okay, so the other faller that we had kind of discussed here was this idea that Michael Mayer, the Notre Dame tight end, who for the most part, given the back injury to Dalton Kincaid and then, some of the injuries to Luke Musgrave, felt like heading into this process, he's sort of the consensus number one, right? And now it's sort of like, maybe not. You look at some of the things that Musgrave can do athletically, how he can fit into an offense, the volume that he could, just basically he could be an explosive player at the tight end position. Kincaid, another guy heavy on the offensive production end. Mayer's more of the combo. I don't know if he's falling based on, I had a GM tell me he thinks that there may be 8 starting tight ends in this group. Now, not 8 great starting tight ends, but 8 tight ends that come out of this class where it'll be, you have some really good ones, you have some, okay guys, and then you kind of just have average starters. But he says, man, it's 8 tight ends in their assessment could be NFL start. I mean, that's 25% of the league. You're starting tight end. Now, it probably speaks to some of the tight end stuff in the NFL now. Maybe the NFL tight ends maybe aren't great. We've had a little bit of a void of a run of great tight ends.
Yeah, I don't remember who I was talking to, but they mentioned, I forget who the player was, but they mentioned to me, it was in favor of an argument for him, like, he's a top 5 tight end. It's like, what the hell does that mean? There's like 3 guys that you gotta have: Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews. 1 TBD with Kyle Pitts. We'll see how healthy he is, and then what's after that? I feel like after that, it's just like whatever you want that 5th guy to be. It's not like there's a whole bunch of them running around.
Sounds like a fantasy football conversation.
Yeah.
It sounds like someone, I'm like, that sounds like me trying to sell someone and why they need to, I'm offering somebody a tight end.
That's why Kyle Pitts is on my team in our dynasty league.
Yeah. That's why Pat Freiermuth and Greg Dulcich are on my team in the fantasy league. So maybe this isn't a matter of really any tight end. That's my thing. Maybe it's not a matter of any tight end really rising or falling. If you're talking about 8 starters, what ultimately is going to flesh out, teams are going to select these guys based on how they fit into their offensive scheme and what they want. You're not going to go, no offense to Kincaid, but if you're sitting there going, hey, I want somebody who's going to have some beef and is going to really help, he's going to be a top tier blocking tight end, you're not taking Dalton Kincaid to do that. You're just not. Now, you might take the combo, you might look for the, the combination, but there are definitely a couple guys where you're like, probably not going to, draft those guys to go and be, inline tight ends and have to, help the running game. You're going to flex them into space and try to throw the ball to them. They're going to be Kelsey, right? That's what you want.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why like Mayer is falling is kind of for those reasons. It's not his game isn't sexy. Like when you watch Travis Kelce, you're just like, holy, this is one of the most incredible like athletes I've seen at this position. He's not that, but Mayer is like he's almost a victim of just like what this draft class is, where he is next to a lot of guys that look like incredible athletes for the NFL. Kincaid, Musgrave, Darnell Washington, Sam Laporta. And then when you look at Mayer's, it's not even like a bad combine. It's just like slightly below above average. I think he finished with like a 7.75 on relative athletic scores. But when you watch him play, man, it's just automatic. And he's playing with some not great quarterback play too. I think he's the most skilled guy, even if he's not the most athletic guy. But I think when we get to this time of year, it's easy to just like, all right, well, if we're trying to separate guys, what do the testing numbers say if we like the film? And that's where he gets dinged a little bit.
What about like Heath Miller? Like, Heath Miller was never Antonio Gates, right? He was never Tony Gonzalez, but he was just a really good tight end. Like he could catch, could block. He was, but it's not like you watched him and you were like, oh my God, like he's just like, wow. Like even Jimmy Graham, you watch Jimmy Graham, you're like, oh my God. Like you have these moments. Heath Miller was just like, at the end of the day, you looked at his production, you're like, caught a bunch of balls and did a lot of good things. And he's just a really good tight end, but he doesn't necessarily blow you away. And then you're sitting there staring at that class of, the collection of tight ends. And you're like, well, how do I separate this out? You're gonna go for the flash. You're gonna go for the guys that make the ooh and ah plays, and he might not necessarily be that guy. Probably doesn't help him, honestly, either. That everybody goes to Georgia because Georgia is just an absolute powerhouse, cranking out NFL players, and they're no doubt in my mind they're looking at Brock Bowers too. So it's like he's also, like he's not only getting this class, but there's also guys going through there going, oh my God, like Brock Bowers is.
Yeah, George's got a tight end that can take a handoff 80 yards. Like that's a different game.
Like that dude literally, you can hand the ball to him in the backfield. He can catch. I mean, he was like, this dude's gonna be insane. I actually, not to get off script here, but because you're obviously a Kyle Pitts guy, you're a Falcons guy. I had a GM tell me that he's like, I think he's better than Pitts. I think his assessment when we get done with it, unless something happens next season, unless there's an injury or something else, he said, I will bet you when we get to the finish line, he will grade out as a better player than even Pitts graded. And by the way, and Pitts was off the chart, like just off the charts.
I'm calling it now. Bowers is going to get dinged for his height next year. I'm calling it now.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
That's going to be the overthought portion of his draft prospect.
There's always something that's overthought. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, again, that for people that are listening, I think when you hear about guys rising or falling, you have to understand this draft's a mess. And I don't know that, what's really true here and what's not true. I mean, Zach Charbonnet could be he could be the second, third, maybe the third running back off the board. He could be the seventh running back off the board. Like it's the assessments and how these players are really sifted out. It's not been a clean process, I feel like, at all. So, and I told you before, that's what you get when you ask someone about the draft and they go, C- draft grade on tight ends. I'm like, that's a terrible draft. Like that is not at all going to be a fun process. So
yeah, to me, it's like the best groups this year are like tight end, offensive tackle at the top, and then like some running backs. But outside of that, it's pretty thin, man. Like I don't know if I said this to you, but I think like once you get past, let's say, wherever that group of like Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, Christian Gonzalez, whenever those guys come off the board, I think you can make a good argument for like picks 10 to like 40, where teams are going to be all over grades on those guys. And there's going to be a bunch of picks on Thursday where it's like, what the hell? You were thinking that? But this draft is really all over the place.
Well, somebody, I asked them to tier it out. And it's one of these teams that historically they only grade out like their draft board isn't 300. It's their draft board's like 125 to 150, like somewhere in that range. They only like to put guys on their board that they know will definitely work for them. And I said, what are the tiers here? And he said, 2 is tier 1. He said I think the top 2 quarterbacks are tier 1 quarterbacks. He said, 3 to 9, he said was tier 2. And then he said 10 to like 60. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, dude, that's insane. That's like, just throw 50 guys in the third tier. Good luck with that. I can't wait for this draft. By the way, we're going to be rolling out the All Juice team in the coming days, and we will talk about this, but I'm telling you, and we're going to have a good long talk about this in terms of, Terez and how he attacked this thing. I maintain this is the toughest All Juice team. I'm scared. I'm legitimately scared because I know that there are players that are going to be on this team that I had evaluators literally say to me, you can't put that guy on the team, that they just disliked him so much or they dislike some element. And I'm like, I don't have a choice here. Like, no matter what, every single player, there's going to be fans of that player and there are going to be like people who can't stand that player. And whereas last year, I told you Jalen Petrie, I was like, I think at one, I don't remember, it ended at like 12, 13, 14 straight calls where like people brought him into the conversation when we were canvassing positions. Nothing like that. Not even remotely close. Nobody got that treatment this year. So hell, we had a hard time at quarterback, because we
sure did.
Yeah. We had to get into like this, the ideology of the team and like, ugh. I can't wait for next year's All Juice team so we can.
Dude, yeah. Let's just Caleb Williams.
Yeah, Brock Bowers, Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr.
That's right. That's 3 spots.
Like there's going to be multiple guys that are with flying colors are going to land on the team next year. I think that wraps it up. Anything else you got going on? Anything you want to talk about as you and I wrap up the All Juice team?
No, not really. I'll have more updates on what content I'm producing before the draft on Monday's show. So I'm ready to just get out of here and take a nap.
All right. Sounds good. Well, we will be back Monday. Charles and I will be to talk about the All Juice team. So make sure you mark that on your calendars. You can always get Charles on Twitter at 4verts. You can get myself at Charles Robinson. You can get our ace producer Stone Rochelle at SJ Rochelle. And as always, please help us keep Terez Paylor's legacy alive. Check out breakingt.com/Terez. That's a capital T for the All Juice tier hoodie. And remember that proceeds from those purchases go to support the Terez A. Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. And you can also contribute to that and the scholarship in his name at Power Mizzou directly if you check out our podcast description. And also help us out with the podcast network. Check out our new NBA podcast, Ball Don't Lie, featuring Vinny Goodwill, Jake Fisher, and Dan Devine, and our new MLB podcast, Bandwagon, featuring Hannah Kaiser and Zach Kreiser, both available wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, help us grow the family. We will see you on Monday. Peace.